I want people to understand this ordeal. It's taken a toll on both of us.
Casey Anthony's parents respond after 15 years of allegations.
I've gotten blamed for something I didn't do, and it tears me up inside.
This can change our life. This is serious.
This is their final response.
The test is about to begin. Please remain still.
Casey Anthony's parents, the lie detector test. Watch now, only on A&E. And watch next day on the A&E app.
Luxury is meant to be livable. Discover the new leather collection at Ashley with premium quality leather sofas, recliners, and more, all built to last. No matter how many spills, scuffs, or pet-related mishaps come its way, the leather collection at Ashley is made with the durability you need for the whole family. Shop the new leather collection at Ashley and find chairs starting at $499.99 and sofas at $599.99. Ashley, for the love of home.
Hey everyone, it's Rebecca. A quick note about this week's episode and the episodes we have coming up in the next few weeks. We recorded this a few days early because my husband and true crime co-author Kevin Flynn, basically he has thyroid cancer, he's having surgery on his throat, and we're really worried about where his voice might be next week and the week after and the week after that. So we're doing some pre-production here. Obviously, it's a difficult time for a variety of reasons. But the reason I wanted to mention this specifically this week is because we're talking about episode 3 of the Case Against Adnan Syed. We do know there are other things going on in the world, such as the Curtis Flowers case in front of the Supreme Court, such as other true crime and legal developments that we typically would cover in real time. But given what's going on with Kevin, we just really wanted to make sure we could get a show out for you. So thank you so much to all of you for sticking with us through good times and bad times as we make this podcast. Thank you so much to everyone who's been supporting us on Patreon the last few weeks as we are trying to make some extra content for you. We really appreciate it. And we don't really anticipate much interruption to our production schedule. But of course, our thoughts are with Kevin, and we're going to do everything we can to ensure his health stays where it should in the next few weeks. And thanks so much to everyone for all the good wishes I know you'll be sending our way.
For exclusive podcasts and more, sign up at patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On, the true crime podcast review about other podcasts, pop culture, TV, and journalism. And this week, the third chapter in the HBO documentary that's got fans of Serial riveted, The Case Against Adnan Syed. Joining me to talk about that and a whole lot more is my beloved real-life husband and true crime co-author, former TV journalist and host of These Are Their Stories, the Law and Order podcast, Kevin Flynn. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, Rebecca. Don't I sound full-throated and
you do.
Really deep and bassy today?
You sound good for now.
Such an asshole.
Also with us is journalist, true crime author, former defense investigator, licensed private investigator, certified cat lady, and Black Diamond ski trail adventurer, Laura Bricker. Hello, Laura.
Hello. Yeah, I don't want to keep that title because it's not going to happen for another 11 years, but it happened once.
Well, we will talk about that a little more, and then we'll also talk about it at more length in our Patreon Crime Writers On After show, because I know I want to hear the story about how 2 firemen abandoned you to die.
Yes.
In the mountains of New Hampshire.
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. But I'm here. So
okay.
I am resourceful, if nothing else.
Also with us is the author
You could have done this podcast with just 2 people. It might have been really bad. Just you and Toby.
Just me and Toby?
Yeah.
Even if we had just stuck to our regular production schedule,
yeah.
It would have been like Toby being like, I don't know, and me being like, and trying to fill in those holes.
Yeah.
Also with us.
Sounds
good. Toby's star is on the rise. He's like, attrition, knocking down my fellow crime writers one by one.
I'm no longer the last one introduced.
And speaking of our little back of the bobsled podcaster,
I'm the brake man.
Along with us is the author behind the noir novels known as the City Trilogy, acclaimed writer, and our very own Patreon book club captain, Toby Ball. Good morning, Toby.
Good morning, Rebecca.
Yes, because of our adjusted production schedule, if you heard the pre-roll of this podcast, you know Kevin is... I'm
right now recuperating.
You're right now recuperating in real time.
Yes.
But you haven't had your surgery yet. That's tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so in order for us to really get the show done, which, listen, I am really concerned about you and I love you very much. And we also know we have to get the show out. And there's a lot going on emotionally and in the real world, but like we have to get the show out. So we
think how great the clip show will be.
I know. Oh.
In memoriam.
Oh, stop it.
Oh,
stop
God,
it.
Kevin.
It's dark, Kevin.
That would be dark.
So we have to get the show done. So we're doing it in the morning. So you're hearing a very different version of the four of us. And Toby, I'm going to start with you. How would you describe Morning Toby to our audience?
I think the thing that best describes it is I cannot come up with words for it right now because it's the morning still.
Oh, so this is going to be an amazing podcast.
Yeah.
Wow. Sit down.
This is a preview of things to come from me.
I don't think so. You sent me some very smart notes. Laura Bricker, how do you feel this morning? As I mentioned in the opening, you almost died yesterday. How'd that go?
Almost dying. There was a lot of F-bombs that occurred in my almost dying episode. Do you want to hear the whole experience of how I almost died?
I don't want to hear give us just the synopsis, and then we'll get into it more in our after show.
I was like, I don't want to say guilted, perhaps lured into going down my first black diamond trail. You know, I am not a particularly adventurous skier and I don't like heights. So it kind of went like, fuck this, oh, fucking fuck this, fuck. All right, I'm just going to go straight and get down. So then I didn't sleep well last night either, but I have had 3 cups of coffee. So I am ready to go now because, you know, it's invigorating to still be alive, Rebecca.
Yes. And we should say for our listeners who don't ski, there are varying degrees of difficulty when you get to the top of a ski area. You like ride the lift to the top and you can make a choice. You can go down the green circle, which is where I like do my very best work on the green circles, man. I snowboard, I don't ski, but like as I've gotten older, I have definitely settled in to the green circles. Then there are the blue squares, which is intermediate, which is depending on the mountain, sometimes pretty easy and sometimes a little tricky parts. Then there's Black Diamond, which is scary. And then there's double and triple Black Diamond, which is, oh, fuck, scary. But Laura, Black Diamond, I know in northern New Hampshire where you're skiing is quite a lot. And so we're all very proud of you for surviving.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you.
And we will talk about the 2 firemen who left you to die in our after show for all our Patreon fans to listen to.
Yeah. It's okay. I got them back. I woke them up this morning at 7 a.m.
I should also mention we have a really special treat in our Patreon after show, which, yes, fans have questions. Sometimes is dropping before the show because we want to, get it out there as soon as we can. We are going to hear from legal Siri Colin Miller on some of the holes he found in the Court of Appeals of Maryland's ruling against Adnan Syed last week. He's found some problems with it that may be the basis of some legal challenges, and he's going to detail those for us. And he's also just going to tell us more about his thoughts about the documentary, too, in our after show. So that's going to be really fun. Legal Siri. # Legal Siri. I'm really excited about it. So moving on. This week, we're taking a look at the Case Against Adnan Syed, Part 3, Justice is Arbitrary. This episode breaks down the prosecution of Adnan Syed 20 years ago for Hae Min Lee's murder and introduces some of the cracks in the foundation of the state's case.
During the time of this digging, we received a phone call, and I didn't even get a chance to talk to him. He told him that I was busy.
If somebody were in Lincoln Park and received 2 calls, those calls would indicate the cell site for Lincoln Park.
Correct. That was the state's case. They said that there were 2 calls that pinged Lincoln Park Tower that evening and Adnan was there.
Now, we are going to be discussing extensive spoilers for Part 3 of the Case Against Adnan Syed, this HBO documentary. So if you just want our letter grade review on this episode of the documentary, check out the show notes. We will put a time code there, which will tell you where to tune in and listen just to hear if we're going to give it an A or a C or a D or whatever letter grades we choose. Now, I do want to follow up on something that came up on our Patreon after show last week that we did not include in the podcast, even though I meant to, and frankly, we just didn't have time. Rabia talked really interestingly, I think, and in a way that I really was happy to hear her talk about the fact that this documentary is using crime scene photos of Hae Min Lee's body. Rabia expressed some discomfort with that. I'm just curious to know, panel, how you feel about it. Kevin, how do you feel about seeing those photos in this?
I was a little surprised. Yeah. I'm thinking of one book that we did where it had very similar photos. Actually, yeah, a woman on her side like that could see, the body's exposed hip. I guess it would have been fine without it.
Yeah. What do you think, Toby? Do you agree with Kevin?
Yeah, I think so for the most part. I mean, I think the reason for having it is to, kind of bring home the tragedy of what happened, because I do think that was one of the criticisms of Serial, is that Hay got sort of lost in the, is Adnan innocent or guilty thing. So I would assume that the idea is by showing those photos, it's like, yeah, this girl was murdered. But for me personally, I don't know really what it adds.
Yeah.
I don't know how her family feels about it, but if she was a member of my family, I think I would prefer not to have pictures like that out. So
Right. So here's where I am on it. I agree that those close-ups of those images, probably not necessary. And I'm sure that, we'll get some pushback here, how is this different than the diary, right? Well, the diary is written. It's not the same as looking at photos of a body, obviously, and I think it's a grayer area. I have mixed feelings only because it is very traditional true crime to show crime scene photos. I mean, we've seen crime scene photos in a million true crime things that came out, in years past, and we don't really think a whole lot about it. So yeah, I agree with you guys. I don't think it's 100% necessary, unless, for instance, they're going to use the photos to make an evidentiary case. I know that they talked about lividity briefly. Yeah. If the photos come into play that way and they say it is necessary to show these to show you this, or show you a rendering of the photo to show you this, that would make more sense to me. But in the way they've been used so far, sort of as B-roll, I agree. It sort of left a weird taste in my mouth. Laura, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think that using them to sort of set the scene of where she was in the woods, because it is sort of, for me, trying to figure out how she was out there and not found for the period of time that she was found, it helps kind of illustrate that by showing where she was concealed. But at the same time, the photos that got closer, I don't necessarily think that those were necessary to advance the story. Because, it's kind of hard. You have to balance the fact that you're telling the story, you're shining light on the investigation, and also, her family and relatives are going to be potentially seeing this show as well.
Right. All right, well, let's get right into episode 3 then. The episode does start with one of the cliffhangers episode 2 left us with, which is that Jay Wilde's ex-girlfriend and victim of domestic violence at his hands, Nikisha, calls Jay.
Hello? Yeah, I'm here. I'm listening.
We don't hear Jay's side of the conversation, and I'm guessing there are reasons for that, legal reasons.
Doesn't sound like they were ready to record it.
Right.
She's just on her phone.
Right. But there also might be a consent.
Two-party consent. Who knows?
In Maryland. Yeah. But the gist that we get, because she tells us, is that he tells Nikisha on that call that he lied about what he knew about the murder to get out of some big weed charges.
He said he got caught with a whole bunch of weed, and it was so much weed, they were trying to pin it on him. So basically, he ratted the man and gave him a bigger story to get him locked up. And he basically gave them what they wanted to know so he could get off. He was saying it so fast in slang, but...
Knowing what we know about Jay, I guess it's a question as to whether or not how much of a grain of salt we should take that with. But Kevin, how'd you feel about that reveal? Is it satisfying for the cliffhanger, or did it leave you hanging? What did you think about that?
No, I thought it was a good resolution to finding out that question, and it does give an explanation for why would Jay make up a story. It doesn't prove that Jay made up a story, but it certainly puts together a lot of circumstantial evidence to show that. And circumstantial evidence, of course, is still evidence. It's not, not evidence. And we call it circumstantial to say that it's not really evidence. It is evidence. And when you put all this circumstantial evidence together, you can come up with, again, your decision based on that.
Right.
So, but nonetheless, they're piling on quite a bit here to explain what Serial did not. It gives Jay a reason to have fibbed.
Yeah, I agree, because I think that was always one of the things that I got hung up on is like, well, why would he lie? And I think, along the way, I've always sort of had this theory like somebody had information on him, or there was something somebody was holding over him. Like there had to be something behind this for him to go along with this story. So I think that seems pretty plausible given what we know about Jay, that they did have something, and this is how he got out of that coming against him. So, but at the same time, Jay's pretty much just full of shit all the time.
Right.
So who really knows? But I mean, it is, if that's not it, there is something else, some other missing piece as to why Jay was involved the way that he was.
Right.
Aside from just being a dick.
Toby, do you think it would be frustrating to be Rabia or Adnan and have these witnesses saying, over and over and over again, including Jay, just, through Nikisha, things that just don't at all line up with the things that were used to convict him?
Yes. I had I guess, a stronger reaction to the whole Jay thing, which was, has he ever come out and said that he was lying about it?
Yeah, in the Intercept interview.
Well, he says he told it, but the real story was different, right?
Right, yeah.
Right, yes. But he did say that in the Intercept interview, yeah.
I mean, years later, and not part of the legal record, but Toby, we do know that.
I thought that was a more stunning development than, say, the end of the Robert Durst thing, where he's burping and saying, "Did I kill her? Yes," or whatever it was. Especially if he didn't realize that this was being taped, that his ex-girlfriend was on camera. And I don't really see what he has to gain from telling a lie like that. So to me, I was just that seems fairly compelling. So there was that. And then the other part of it, I think, was, when they're talking to Jen and her friend who was going to UMBC.
Christy,
Christy. It's this idea that they're I don't know what day it was. I wasn't sure. I knew all this stuff happened on the same day. I just wasn't sure what day it was. So the cop said it was this day. So I said, yeah, that day.
Yep.
It's that's actually absolutely the entire case.
Absolutely.
What was interesting is seeing their two reactions to kind of that realization, which was Christy was you could see that sort of sinking feeling. And she says, because I think he's guilty. And to me, that just seems I feel as though sort of out of self-defense, you probably have to feel that way once you realize that you sort of made this mistake that may have put him in jail for the rest of his life. And then Jen is just I wish I'd never been a part of this. I wish I hadn't talked to you. So it seemed to me that the import of that was pretty clear to them.
Yep.
But I thought there were parts of this that were very damning to the case against Adnan. But it was pretty wild.
Well, it's hard to introduce Jay's new comments, into court, because a lawyer would just say, you didn't hear Jay say that.
Right. It's what she says.
You heard Nikisha say that.
Right.
And I also think, and again, maybe I'm jumping ahead towards the end of the episode, but when they present the visual of the calendar.
Right.
And they mark that Wednesday, the 13th, in blue.
Yes.
I thought that was for the perception of the audience, that just to visually learn that and to okay, I understand that, but to see it,
right?
And you're oh, okay. And they cut back and forth to the 2000s. So how did you know it was the 13th? Well, you guys, cops, you guys told me that.
Right.
And then you see the 13th. You couldn't have been with Christy because she was in school that night.
And she couldn't have been at a conference that day because she was in school that day. She could not have missed a day of school. So let's just jump there. It happens at the end of the episode, but it does tie up the cliffhanger from episode 2. There is a scene, they do talk to Christy and they confront her with the evidence that she could not have been at the conference where she always remembers. It's very plausible that, you do tie events to other things that happened on the same day, right? You just do. The Judge Judy thing's super plausible. The conference thing's super plausible. But she could not have been at the conference on that day because she had to have been in class that day because it was winter term. They only have 6 classes, and if you miss one, you don't pass, and she got a B+ in that class. So she knows it. She knows it, and you see her know it. And then there is that scene where we see Christy and Jen sitting together, drinking their sugary drinks, and their story is challenged.
I'm telling you that in my mind, my memory, that's what happened.
It's just one of those things that's you're involved in that you'll never know the truth. And that's hard to, I think, come to grips with, that you're part of something that you'll really never know the truth about.
Don't matter to me. I used to care, but now.
She still seems sure, but Christy seems devastated to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you could see it on her face that she was oh, shit, this isn't how I remember. You could see kind of I don't want to say the wheels turning, but you could definitely see the realization that the story didn't happen on the day that she thought it did. But, Jen, I was just whoa, she is losing her shit.
For real, I'm ready to change my name to get out of this shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want any fucking thing to do with it. Period. Flat out. I wish I never would have talked to y'all in the first place.
Jen's kind of a tough character.
Yeah.
And that scene particularly, I'm like, I don't think I'd want to tangle with Jen. I'm surprised that they get her to talk as much as they did. And I'm curious what happened after that scene. I want to see what we see next with Jen, if that is literally the last that we see of her, because she's just like, fuck you all, I'm not getting involved in this.
Yeah.
I'm going to punch you out. But I think just the amount of work that went into getting those class schedules from that time period, which probably, I mean, I'm sure colleges have records, but that's like 20 years ago. I mean, that's, not stuff, and I know a lot of places, as things have gone digital, have gotten rid of their paper records. So why was this never done before, I guess?
Yeah.
Any other So
Undisclosed did it, to be fair.
There's a lot of this, If you listen to Undisclosed, it's not a surprise.
No, they did, but I mean,
yeah.
you know what I mean. In like season 1 of Serial and stuff, we didn't hear that type of work being done. So really interesting. It makes me think, like, if this gets to trial again, there's so many inconsistencies with different witnesses. It's like, who's even going to be credible that's going to testify that was part of the first trial at this point?
I mean, I think it's pretty clear that if this ruling hadn't come down and if the state had decided to go forward with a new trial, it would have been a completely different trial, because all of the evidence they presented in Adnan's original trials is out. I mean, it's basically all contestable or impeached. The witnesses have all been impeached. Like, I can't even imagine what the theory of a new trial would have been, which is sort of secretly why I wanted it to happen, even because I just was curious to know, like, what are they going to come up with now? I mean, I really do think that Christy in particular, I've said it for a long time, the flaw of Serial, especially in retrospect, is basing their podcast on two premises. One is Jay or Adnan, binary choice, bad premise. The second one is, making so much of the podcast about the reliability of memory, because Christy has very good reason to be sure of her memory, but it's also wrong. And we see her watch her own interview with the cops when she says the cops told her. It's insane. All right, well, let's go back to the Jay stuff, because that is like sort of the first half of this episode. Detective Massey tells us that Jay is, quote, by no means an informant, that the choice for people like Jay is twofold. You're either a witness or you're a defendant, but he will not characterize him as an informant. Laura, former defense investigator, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that was interesting because he said something. I wrote this down. With the information he had, he's sitting right on the fence. So he's basically saying, he could have gone either way. And that does happen a lot, I think, in, criminal cases, because you're going out and you're interviewing, people that have been, in a lot of cases, friendly with people that are being arrested. And so, judging people's credibility, it's like, okay, who actually is credible here? And sometimes it's like nobody's credible. So who's the most credible or the least credible? And it's kind of a balancing act as you're, looking at cases and putting cases together. But I mean, I think Jay is so just ridiculously non-credible. I'm like, what the? But at the same time, we hear that former prosecutor saying, we're just trying to clear our desks, at this point. So you can see how he was used, but crazy.
We also hear that former prosecutor, his name is Ivan Bates, a Baltimore City prosecutor, and he
nice
says—
tie, by the way.
Yes.
I really like this orange tie.
He says that in his experience working with Kevin Urich, the guy doesn't care very much about details. He says that.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. And, and that is a pretty big professional flaw, is to not look at details. When
you're putting people away for life or sentencing them to the death penalty.
But look at Susan Simpson. And, she had a giant stack, thousands of papers, and her eagle eye picked up the thing about the fax cover sheet.
In like a couple of minutes.
I've been an associate attorney for a long time, so I have my methods of handling new cases and new case files. And what I always do is when I get a new case, I go through it and I assemble all the communications in order, because the file's always a mess. And you have to figure out who said what when. When did the cops request this? When did AT&T respond? And I'm like, okay, let's see what this instruction sheet actually says. How to read subscriber activity reports. All calls are recorded in Eastern Standard Time. Good to know. And it also says, outgoing calls only are reliable for location status. Any incoming calls will not be considered reliable information for location.
That is a super small detail, which is very easily missed and obviously was. To be on the other end of that spectrum, where, again, you're just trying to crank this out as efficiently as you can, maybe in part because you think you got a really strong case, the cops aren't going to lead you wrong, and all this stuff points in this one direction, so let's go there. It could be also more than just that you're a little sloppy. It can also be, like Susan pointed out, when you're a prosecutor, you're supposed to serve justice. You're not supposed to just be there to see everybody who comes in gets convicted.
Right.
And a lot of times prosecutors don't see their job that way.
One interesting detail, we do get some close-up photographs of Christina Gutierrez, who we've not only seen in the distance before in courtroom shots.
She looks scary.
Yeah.
She looks, I think, pretty much exactly as I expected she would look. She looks disheveled.
Like Gilda Radner.
She looks like she's having a tough time, right?
Yeah.
And then we get another meaty part of the episode, Asia McClain. Asia talks about her journey to becoming a key witness in Adnan Syed's post-conviction case. First, I just want to talk about this. I think it's nutty only because I just can't relate to it. It's not actually nutty, but it's particular. Her habit of taking notes on everything that happens and then keeping those notes forever. She still has high school stuff, diaries, notes, calendars, but she also has notes of a call with Kevin Urich that happened like a decade ago, and she shows them to us.
Mm-hmm. And then I wrote down something Urich said to me directly. If I had any doubt that Adnan didn't kill Hay, it would be my moral obligation to see that he didn't serve any time.
Toby, are you this organized in your life? You keep these kinds of notes?
Weightlifting with Squishy and Sneaky Pete and
Squee.
Beers over at
Skis.
Yeah, no, I don't. Yeah, I don't know. I guess there are, clearly there are people who do. I don't understand why you would, but
you think that someday this is going to be important.
Right. Or you think you're the kind of person who thinks that everything that they do is important and they want to just keep track of everything.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a personality trait. Some people just, want to think their own life is worth documenting. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That's just a personality that Asia seems to have, which is interesting. And she talks, I think, very well about why.
That makes for an unconventional witness on this thing.
Right. But then in 2012, we hear a court proceeding where Asia's affidavit, the one that Rabia asked her to write and got notarized, comes up against prosecutor Kevin Urich's take in court.
A young lady named Asia called me.
And what did she say?
She was concerned because she was being asked questions about an affidavit she'd written back at the time of the trial. She told me that she'd only written it because she was getting pressure from the family, and she basically wrote it to please them and get them off her back.
Surprise, surprise. Turns out that this was also a lie, according to everyone. Laura, what are your thoughts on that?
I am not surprised. I mean, it does induce some rage because it's just like at some point, enough is enough and somebody needs to call this guy out on his bullshit. But what the fuck? I mean, how can you just lie to that level and have just get away with it without anybody? I mean, I guess you can, because at one point somebody said, yeah, you need to understand the prosecutors are the most, powerful people in the court. I'm like, yeah, clearly. And, they're not censored or fact checked at any point. So, I'm not surprised. It's just ridiculous, though.
So, Kevin, Asia characterizes Thiru's take on her in the present day, in the PCR proceedings, that she's being demonized. It was pretty odd, I think, considering that the state lied to her the first time around, lied about her affidavit the second time around, and then never reached out to her in the modern day at all, even though they knew she was going to be potentially a witness in the case.
Yeah, again, you're certainly left with the impression either that the institution is dirty or it is fatally flawed.
Do you ever meet someone who seems kind of off? Whether it's a creepy neighbor or random phone number that keeps calling you, Truthfinder has you covered. You can search for people by name, address, phone number, email, and more. Truthfinder can be especially helpful for running confidential background checks on anyone you're planning to meet from online dating apps. Go to truthfinder.com/podcasts for a special offer. That's truthfinder.com/podcasts to access your special offer today.
I want people to understand this ordeal. It's taken a toll on both of us.
Casey Anthony's parents respond after 15 years of allegations.
I've gotten blamed for something I didn't do, and it tears me up inside.
This can change our life. This is serious.
This is their final response.
The test is about to begin. Please remain still.
Casey Anthony's parents, the lie detector test. Watch now, only on A&E. And watch next day on the A&E app.
Luxury is meant to be livable. Discover the new leather collection at Ashley with premium quality leather sofas, recliners, and more, all built to last. No matter how many spills, scuffs, or pet-related mishaps come its way, the leather collection at Ashley is made with the durability you need for the whole family. Shop the new leather collection at Ashley and find chairs starting at $499.99 and sofas at $599.99. Ashley, for the love of home.
So back to the Case Against Adnan Syed Part 3. There is a really series of fun scenes in this episode about Serial coming out and what it was like for all of the kids who went to school with Hay and Adnan, who are now adults, to listen to the podcast, how it sort of brought the case back to them. It's cut really nicely, that scene. But it turns out Woodlawn kids aren't the only ones listening. So is one Susan Simpson.
I was on Reddit and somebody posted a blog by this attorney, Susan Simpson, and I started reading it, and she had written, I don't know, like 35, 40 pages about Jay's police statements. And I just emailed her and I said, you're analyzing this stuff in a way that nobody ever has. I have all the files and I'd love to give it all to you.
I got the case file from Rabia. She handed it over to me. I told her not to. I'm like, this is stupid, you don't know me. Because this was very early on. And she gave it to me anyway. She's like, okay, well, go find stuff in there.
So first, I just want to talk about something practical. The amount of hours and work and time, even pre-undisclosed, that Susan Simpson and legal Siri Colin Miller too did on this case, like put in investigative hours, legal research, reaching out, blogging. Laura, you are a professional investigator and an amateur Nancy Drew. Can you relate to this at all? Or are you just completely amazed like I am at just the amount of their lives that these professional people with day jobs put into working on this case?
To do that on the side, in addition to your day job, is absolutely amazing. I did it for a day job for a number of years. And even then, it was exhausting because you're always afraid you're going to miss something and you're highlighting and making notes and going over things and making sure you're reading everything very carefully. So, to do that at the end of your regular job and with that level of detail and dedication, that takes a special type of person.
It does.
To be able to stick that out. It's like I was getting paid to do it. They're not.
Right.
Fight the power. Yeah.
Well, I do know Susan. Obviously, I work with her and I've met her on a number of occasions. And she is a really interesting and special type of person. She's one of the most intense people I know. Mm-hmm. And she's exactly who you want digging into stuff on your behalf. She's exactly who you want because she is like a junkyard dog who does not let go when she gets a little bite of something meaty. And in this case, using the cell tower evidence we heard in Serial, Susan is armed with a series of helpful pictures, blob maps. She walks us through how a series of misinterpretations of the data and even typos of numbers were used to help Jay craft his version of the day that Adnan allegedly murdered Hay. Now, Serial tried to cover this in that episode where they explained the technology and everything. They didn't have this information at the time. Kevin, were you able to follow along with what Susan was saying in this part of the episode? Because it was complicated.
It was, but I'm also someone who has followed Undisclosed and followed the PCR. And this was evidence that was submitted. So it wasn't new to me. But like we said, if you've read a book and then you go to see the movie, you don't complain about that the plot line is the same and you know certain things. But I think it was great to visually see it again. And I think it's really important that the greater public, the HBO viewers who may not have done anything after listening to Serial, to see that and really have that cause a lot of doubt in the way that story was put together, not only from the technical side or the way that the cell phone expert said.
Abe W. We'll just call him because Moranowitz.
His name's Abe, and he's like a young, hot-looking guy.
I had no idea he was so handsome.
I
no
just
idea.
pictured this old guy with
Me
bald
too.
head and the liver spots. But you had him. You also had the detectives. They played back how they had been involved in bad arrests that were overturned because of, I don't know if you technically call it misconduct or whatever, but you certainly lay out the case that how could this possibly have gone wrong when they have all these pings and they're able to string all this stuff together between the typos and them having to adjust the schedule to where they think the phone was, to the unreliability of the incoming calls. Again, that is the crux of why we believe the state's case is flawed, as well as the validity evidence.
Toby, were you able to follow along with what Susan was saying here? Because she was basically making the case that everything that Jay said, the confession that was elicited and what we know, they say it was their first interview with him, but we know it was their, fifth or sixth interview with him, that they used this data, which was faulty, which is how Susan can prove they used the data to make the narrative. Do you, A, buy that, and were you able to follow along as she was laying out this case for us?
It was certainly easy to follow, I thought. Yeah, I mostly buy it. I mean, it's certainly, like, at worst, it calls a lot of his testimony into question. And, at best, it shows that it's pretty carefully fabricated. You make a story to fit the evidence. Yeah, no, I thought it was very effective. I think I followed this stuff a little bit less than you guys have. So I didn't have quite the same background in it. I didn't find it hard to follow at all. I thought Susan laid it out well. It was well edited.
Now, Laura, one of the things that, the details of all the cell stuff that really strikes me, we talked about a little bit earlier, but happens at the end of the episode. Christie's being involved in this case at all is because of this faulty map drawn by police. These incoming calls, they had to get Jay to make up a reason why he'd be somewhere on that map that he probably wasn't. Mm-hmm. And the thing geographically that's closest to that spot is Christie's house. So that is how ultimately, plausibly, Christie ends up being drawn into this at all. The whole reason, this whole idea that it's planted in her mind that it must have been on that day was because Jay needed a reason to be at her house that day because the police typed the numbers of these cell tower sites wrong and they drew a faulty map.
Clearly at some point that whole group had hung out together and done their, pot smoking, hanging around, little adventure, but it wasn't that day. So, it's interesting that whole, how memory and witness memory plays into things. It's like the power of suggestion is strong. And it's like, oh, it must have been that day. Because, I know at some point there was Jay and that weird kid here. And, oh, that must have been it. So just amazing when you look at the timelines now and the additional investigation that has been done to look back at how pliable some of these witnesses were in terms of going along with what was suggested to them. But I mean, I don't know. I think she was there just so we could guess what her real name was all these years until now, quite honestly. Kathy, not Kathy. Yeah. So I don't know. I think that added a lot to the original serial, getting to say that over and over again.
I'm really glad that this documentary just got her on record in a way that Serial had her, but they didn't use her real name. And I think that this documentary, just how much further they were able to get with some of these same people is just really impressive to me. Because you would imagine that someone like Christie might be less interested in participating in a project after what happened with Serial. Because as Asia says, when she was interviewed, when all these people were interviewed, they had no idea that it was going to be listened to by millions of people. They thought it might be like some little radio story or some newspaper article. They didn't know. Now they know. And they still were able to get Christie and Jen to do it. I think that's really impressive journalism. Because it's not easy to cultivate those sources and to make them feel good about it. Well, there is a scene that's famous from Undisclosed. Susan Simpson in Undisclosed, in an early episode, talked about how you can hear the police when Jay starts to go off track in his taped interview doing this. And what she claims that they are doing is tapping at the map or tapping at a statement and reminding him what to say. Kevin, do you hear that in the tape we actually hear in the documentary?
Yes, I've always wanted to hear the tap. I think I've heard the tap, tap, tap before, but they synced it with their reenactment.
Yeah.
It certainly, the suggestion is very powerful when you see it.
Right.
Could it be something else? I mean, could it be somebody tapping their foot on the leg of the table kind of nervously? I guess it could be, but I think it is more likely what they put out that it was somebody tapping on the table, pointing at something.
Whenever he forgets the script, forgets what he's supposed to be doing, they're like, no.
What happens then? I believe, can you bear with me for a minute? Okay, we left there. I took him back to schooling, and I went back to my friend Jen's house and waited for him to call.
All right. Well, a couple details. First of all, Adnan does remember going to Christie's apartment. Doesn't think it was on that day. Susan talks about how the state's case was cell calls. That it's all based on those incoming calls, which are the unreliable ones. And Abe Woronowitz, Abe W., the very handsome cell expert who testified at trial, we find out that he reaches out to Urich because he never saw the fax cover sheet. And clearly whatever answer he gets there is unsatisfying because he does agree to talk to Susan and ultimately recants his expert testimony. Laura, what do you think of this idea that like the key witness that provided the key expert testimony then later recanted that testimony, and yet this was the issue that in the new ruling, because of a technicality, cannot be held up to reinstate Adnan's right to a new trial?
The technicality part, that's just, that's awful. But the fact that this guy actually came forward willingly and was tearful, I mean, it kind of restores your faith in humanity a little bit, that somebody that was, a prosecution witness the first time around, very, big part of the case, actually did the right thing. And the fact that he did the right thing and then it's still not able to help the case is absolutely infuriating. And it's like, why certain, pieces of the justice system are there to ensure things are fair and that protocols and laws are followed. But in something like this, you're like, are you, it's maddening that even though this is the truth, it cannot be used.
I love all of the squeaking door sound effects.
I'm sorry, that was Fireman Ken. He literally just walked in the middle of this. So
it's cool.
Sorry about that.
It adds some atmosphere.
Yeah, no sweat.
It's like we're recording our podcast in a fun haunted house, as we discussed.
You are. I'll mute it when he comes back in, so I'll mute myself now.
No worries, Laura Brooker. Everyone likes to hear Fireman Ken cameos. No shame there.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I do want to talk to what I think of as the heart of this episode, something that we have not really seen or heard, especially in Serial, those who follow that podcast. The PCR hearing happens in real time as they're filming this documentary. And there's an incredibly moving scene where Adnan's family and loved ones are standing outside on the sidewalk, just waiting for that glimpse of him as he walks by. And his mother, who has become, I really think, like the heroine of this whole thing, is just standing there watching her son, dozens of feet away in handcuffs. And there's just so much joy in that, even though it's so sad, especially knowing what we know now. Kevin, what did you think of that part of the documentary?
I agree. I thought it was a nice scene. And also, I mean, it was made possible by law enforcement that they, somebody on the inside said, you look to them on the right. We're going to give you a minute. It's a nice reminder that even though folks are incarcerated, that it's recognized that they are still human. And, 9 out of 10 other defendants, I don't know if they would have gotten that little bit. But it was a very small gesture that I think went a long way.
I think so, too. And I think that after the PCR hearing, another really moving scene is we see the family go home. And Adnan's dad we see on camera for the first time.
Aww.
And Adnan's brother tells his dad about how Abe apologized to the family for his earlier testimony.
Do you remember the old cell phone expert? He wrote an affidavit saying that he doesn't stand by his testimony. We were all going out for dinner and they invited him, so Robbie was telling us, don't talk about the case. He doesn't like to talk about it. I introduced myself. I say, hi, I'm Adnan's brother, and I introduced to Mom. And then he said, I'm sorry. It's because of me that your brother is in jail.
He had tears.
Yeah, he had tears in his eyes.
Robbie started crying.
And I said, no, don't you ever think like that. It's not your fault. And it broke my heart because it makes me wonder how many more victims are in this trial.
I just love his little dad. I want to go give him a hug. I think that's the thing that this HBO documentary has done effectively that I didn't have quite the same sense of in Serial, is really allowing us this window into Adnan's immediate family in a different way that we didn't have before. And I mean, that scene on the street when he was coming out of court, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I did tear up a little bit during that part. I was like, oh. And then his dad, who has, avoided the court proceedings and talks about why he did that. And then, just to see how the other family members, are just looking out for him and trying to keep him included. And it was kind of heartbreaking.
Now, Toby, another aspect of this case that I don't think we saw or heard much about in Serial is, Adnan wins at that round of the PCR. His family is celebrating. There's a lot of joy. Of course, Hae-Min Lee's family is not happy. And then there's some really interesting stuff in this episode about the kind of lack of opportunity and marginalization of Koreans in Baltimore, the Korean community in Baltimore, other crimes where justice wasn't done for victims of murders. And we also see some of that coverage in the Korean language newspapers of this case and how it was covered differently in that side of the community. What did you think of that section of the documentary, Toby?
I think it's an interesting thing. And another thing that Serial didn't touch on at all is that you've got these two communities rallying around the people they have involved in this case, and that the Muslim community, like people were putting up their houses to help Adnan get bail. And, there's this widespread support. But then there was also the Korean community, which, I think clearly feels a little besieged. As you were saying, economic opportunities aren't there. It seems as though when Koreans are victims, that the justice system isn't sort of fully invested in investigating. That was an interesting piece of it, which I hadn't heard anything about in the past. And to an extent, I think it's important context. I don't know if a guy like Yurick feels any pressure from that or whatever, but you would think that maybe it's not a huge pressure, but one of the pressures is we've got to, in order to kind of show that we're not completely ignoring crimes with Korean victims, that we have to kind of get on this. So it was good. It was good. I'm glad they put that in. I hadn't run into that anywhere else before.
I was also really moved by the tape of Adnan's mom talking about Hae-Min Lee and how she felt so much for Hae's mom.
She lost the child, for me, I can go and hug my son. But she won't be able to feel her daughter anymore. She's gone forever.
Something that Toby alluded to a second ago was, the name of this episode, Justice is Arbitrary. A couple of things happen in Adnan's case that are stunning, really. First off, a mistake on his charging document gets him denied the opportunity for bail initially, which sets him back. Then we see and hear Adnan's ethnicity being used against him at the bail hearing. So egregiously and gross.
Your Honor, the fact that the defendant has strong support from the community, that is what makes him unique in this case. He has the resources of this entire community here. Our investigation reveals that the defendant has an uncle in Pakistan, and he has indicated that he can make people disappear.
That his ethnicity was brought up, I think that was a big shock, and that the community was implicated, that they would help him escape was
The defendant is a member of the Muslim community.
The prosecutor was even racist against what she called a, quote, disorganized Pakistani embassy in New York that apparently was just handing out visas willy-nilly to murderers who wanted to go back to their country. Laura, what were your thoughts on that?
It was kind of, to watch it, it was just it's awful. But I was glad that it was included because I feel like Serial sort of was well, I'm not sure if this was an issue. And it was kind of not addressed to the same degree during the original Serial coverage. So, I think this was a big part of the case. And I think that this sort of undercurrent of racism here was definitely at play, and here it was called out. But it's still hard to watch because the part where they're like, well, he's got the uncle who makes people disappear, and it's just fear-mongering, really. So it was difficult to watch, but I'm glad that they did include this.
Yeah, if Adnan had been an African American, and if you substitute Nigeria for Pakistan and said all the same things, I mean, there would have been screaming in that courtroom. And that, I can't imagine that a prosecutor would not be sanctioned for just overt racism like that.
I don't think prosecutors are sanctioned in that part of the country.
I just I cannot believe that it wouldn't be called out, or that an African American judge would let that stand.
Yeah.
It just felt like it was, not only was it a cheap shot, but it was just so overtly racist.
Yeah.
If nobody from the community is there supporting him, that's a knock against him.
Correct.
Everybody from the community is there supporting him. They use that as a knock against him.
Exactly. And that's what Chris Flohr points out, his original lawyer, is that the whole thing around bail is you're supposed to demonstrate not a flight risk, and you're supposed to demonstrate that you have ties to the community. And here you have people in his community offering up their homes.
Yeah.
What is a bigger tie than that, than being beholden to all of these people who are going to mortgage their home so that you can just be free while your defense is being prepared?
Well, people facing murder charges very rarely get bail anyway. But
he was a juvenile.
He was a juvenile. It couldn't be a capital case like it said on his paperwork, which, even when that was pointed out and they had the rehearing, it was still, it's still what it was. But it just certainly shows a bit of the institutional racism in that jurisdiction.
Yeah.
If it's employed by the police and it's also employed by the district attorney's office, I mean, what chance have you got?
And we hear it from all sides, right? We know that the Black community is the target of systemic racism in policing in Baltimore. We hear in this documentary that the Korean community feels marginalized and like their crimes are not properly investigated. And now here we have the Muslim community coming out in force to, rally around one of their own, a favorite son.
Right.
Same thing.
And why was Adnan's dad not in court in 2016?
Because in 2016 and in all of the other proceedings, he thought his beard and his looks would be held against his son.
Yeah. And where did he get that from?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And he's not wrong, apparently.
No.
He was
and
right.
It wasn't just a feeling. It was demonstrated for him at that bail hearing.
It's gross. It was gross. Meanwhile, Jay magically gets a private attorney appointed for him by Kevin York, the prosecutor, strikes a magic plea, and with time served is able to walk away. We see the hearing, we see his sentencing, we hear him talk, and we see the only person with him in the courtroom is Stephanie. It was quite the contrasting tableau there, right, Toby?
Yeah, it was grim.
I thought that the crying remorse scene with Jay in the courtroom where he's expressing remorse, I'm like, are you kidding me? Right now? Because that this isn't sincere, but then you look around and, it's like we heard in the episode before this that Jay's friends really don't want much to do with him or people that hung out with him. But Stephanie, I guess we haven't seen Stephanie yet.
No.
Or we haven't heard, where is present day Stephanie? So I would be curious to hear from her. The whole thing was so clearly orchestrated to benefit Kevin Urick's prosecution of Adnan, right down to the private attorney, which again was just absolutely ridiculous. But it's just one more thing that makes you enraged about how this whole case played out.
Well, I kind of, I don't exactly feel sorry for Jay, but it does kind of show that he didn't have the same kind of support system or close relationships or anything. It makes it more understandable that if he finds his back against the wall because he's got this charge hanging over him, he doesn't have people in his corner who are going to help him out or whatever. I mean, he's basically on his own to try and figure out what to do about things. I know that Jay is not a particularly sympathetic character, but I did think that was sort of insightful about what his reality is when he's making decisions about what he's going to do sort of in response to different events that happen to him. It's basically just him figuring it out.
That's right.
He has no counsel.
Yeah, and actually, I agree with you. This might surprise people to hear, I find Jay to be a sympathetic character in a lot of ways. He, in my opinion, was used again and again and again and again by a likely corrupt prosecutor who would just wanted to win and manipulated a kid. You think about Jay's circumstances and his life choices and the crimes he would go on to commit. Nobody was reaching out to help him in offers of genuine help that were meant to make his life better. They were using fear to get him to behave the way they wanted him to behave. And if you think that what that's going to lead to is a productive and healthy member of society that you'd want to have in your life, like, you're out of your mind. And he's not the only person like this in Baltimore. I'm sure there are thousands of now adults who were young people once who were used this way. And so I do think he's a sympathetic character, even though, clearly he has issues with the truth. Clearly he has issues with violence in his life and violence against women in particular. I know what you're talking about, Toby, and I don't disagree with you. Laura, one final note before we talk about the cliffhanger that we saw at the end of the episode. You sent me a very complimentary note about Adnan's current attorney, Justin Brown. What were your thoughts on him? And we see him appear at the end of this episode.
Oh, my God. I loved him. What a genuine and a good person. And when he said he might be 80 years old still litigating this case, I'm like... Justin Brown, I'll help you. And then we see him with his family and his little kids. And when he's walking out, when, we see the ruling in Adnan's favor and all the people outside. I love the guys outside the bar telling him to come in and celebrate and stuff. It's nice to see somebody that's doing their job for the right reason.
Yeah. I mean, he's a professional lawyer. I mean, he's certainly been on the case for a long time. He's wonderful and he's lovely and very handsome too. I have met him in person as well. And I'm not afraid to call out the handsome men of this story. Justin Brown is definitely on that list, along with surprise handsome guy Abe W., cell phone expert. Yeah. All right. Well, at the very end of the episode, I just want your quick thoughts. We do see a little cliffhanger. Someone writing an email asking for some DNA testing.
Well, that's part of where Serial actually left off. And we know, like they said, Kevin Urich said there's DNA, but no one ever tested it. I'm a little unclear, sort of like, where was this DNA collected from? Did this come from the body? And if so, I think they said there was no sign of sexual trauma.
Right.
And
no semen samples.
Again, they're setting up the promise for a lot of different things here. And hopefully in the final episode, this gets resolved in a way that is not only legally satisfactory, but narratively satisfactory.
It's definitely a question that's been hanging out there since Serial. Toby, you might remember episode 7 of Serial, the Deidre Enright Innocence Project episode. DNA was sort of hinted at. Other evidence that hadn't been tested was hinted at. And it's certainly been one of the biggest kind of question marks out there for me. So I was super excited to see this at the end. And you caught that too, right, Toby?
Oh, yeah. Yep. I'll say it now instead of when we tie things up. But there's just a lot of things in the air right now in this documentary. And I think unlike, say, the Ted Bundy documentary or Murder Mountain, where you didn't have to watch the whole thing to make a judgment on the quality of it. You just knew after 2 or 3 episodes, you're like, it doesn't really matter how it ends as long as it kind of continues along this way. Right. It's going to be a B or an A. This one, I think, is in this weird situation where depending on how they resolve things in the final episode, it could either be brilliant or you could just end up being you just kind of threw all this stuff out there and what do we get out of it?
Yeah. It's very efficient storytelling. You have to admit there's a lot of stuff in 3 episodes.
No. I mean, they do. I mean, it's obviously it's high quality. Unlike other stuff we've watched, they're making a crap load of promises about what they're going to resolve. And in a lot of these things, they kind of make a promise and then you don't hear about it again. Talk about Don. They got to talk about the car. They got to talk about DNA. And that's at a minimum.
Yeah, big list.
And then finding the body. I mean, there's all these things that they're going to have to cover. So maybe it's an 8-hour episode or... So I don't know.
It seems like a good time to transition then. Toby, episode 3, The Case Against Adnan Syed on HBO. Do you want to just go ahead and give it a letter grade, given everything that you just said about what we may or may not see in episode 4? Just this episode alone, grade it on a scale of A through F. Toby Ball, I'm putting you on the spot.
I'm just sick of giving B pluses all the time. I guess I'll give it an A minus in that I thought that there was some stuff in here that wasn't setting something up for later. I thought the interviews with Jen and Christy and then sort of what we hear about what Jay says over the phone, those kind of resolved themselves, which was good. There was affecting stuff. Again, it's sort of a piece with all the other ones, but maybe I thought this was slightly better, so A minus.
What about you, Laura Brooker? What grade do you give part 3 of the Case Against Adnan Syed on HBO?
I'm going with A. This is my favorite episode so far of this series. I liked seeing Jen pop her top along with Kathy, not Kathy. I liked seeing some of the scenes in the courtroom that we hadn't seen before. Hearing, we knew about the cell phone evidence, but then hearing about that again, it was a really good episode with a lot of interesting details. But like Toby, I'm kind of like waiting for the payoff to see, how they're going to wrap this up in episode 4.
Yeah. Well, I am also going to give it an A. I think this documentary continues to be super strong. I would love to get the ear of somebody who, with no exposure to this case, had only listened to Serial season 1 and then watched this. I'd love to talk to people to find out what they think, because I think this episode in particular picks up a lot of the threads that I think Sarah Koenig thought she closed in Serial season 1. She had this Kathy not Kathy thing. She had this. And this episode takes a lot of it apart in a way that is, I think, really strong and compelling. And it's also just, let's be real, this is what this stuff is actually for, whether or not we want to say it or not. This series is so entertaining. It is so well done on so many levels. I'm really loving it. I'm going to give this one an A. What about you, Kevin?
Yeah, I'm an A-. Again, I feel like it's building towards a big ending, and I'm with Toby that as far as the narrative part of it, all this stuff needs to be resolved in one way or another. You may not have an answer for, was the car moved, or what does that even mean if it was? You can't leave them unanswered. Even if it's answered with a who knows, you have to kind of, in a satisfactory way, pull all these things together. Yeah, like the Bundy thing, it was sort of like one narrative track. And you're right, you've got a couple different ones, like a good book would. And so, again, if you could pull them all together, that would be good. And, I did hear from one person that I work with who watched episode 1 and was like, this is Serial all over again. Yeah, and maybe it was important to restate that part of the case, because you forget it really is an important part of the murder. It's not just high school gossip. And so now in these past 2 episodes, we have moved far beyond that and started to take apart the case in ways that Serial did not.
Do you ever meet someone who seems kind of off? Whether it's a creepy neighbor or random phone number that keeps calling you, Truthfinder has you covered. You can search for people by name, address, phone number, email, and more. Truthfinder can be especially helpful for running confidential background checks on anyone you're planning to meet from online dating apps. Go to truthfinder.com/podcasts for a special offer. That's truthfinder.com/podcasts to access your special offer today.
I want people to understand this ordeal. It's taken a toll on both of us.
Casey Anthony's parents respond after 15 years of allegations.
I've gotten blamed for something I didn't do, and it tears me up inside.
This can change our life. This is serious.
This is their final response.
The test is about to begin. Please remain still.
Casey Anthony's parents, the lie detector test. Watch now, only on A&E. And watch next day on the A&E app.
Luxury is meant to be livable. Discover the new leather collection at Ashley with premium quality leather sofas, recliners, and more, all built to last. No matter how many spills, scuffs, or pet-related mishaps come its way, the leather collection at Ashley is made with the durability you need for the whole family. Shop the new leather collection at Ashley and find chairs starting at $499.99 and sofas at $599.99. Ashley, for the love of home.
Now it's time for my favorite part of the podcast, a little something I like to call the crime of
the week.
Los Angeles County deputies zoomed into the mountains last week after callers reported a violent kidnapping. Witnesses saw a man tied up with duct tape flee the trunk of a black BMW while 2 men with a handgun and shovel chased after him. Law enforcement located the car and, fearing an exchange of gunfire, employed high-risk traffic stop techniques. When they got everyone out of the car, they found it wasn't a kidnapping at all. The men were shooting a music video. The police response was strong because there had been a rash of murders and body dumps in that area. But not everything about the incident was fake. The actors were using a real loaded handgun as a prop. The deputies arrested one of the men on weapons charges and admonished the others for filming such a violent music video in public without first notifying the authorities.
Man, those Celine Dion videos are getting like really edgy.
They really are.
Why does the gun need to be loaded?
Well,
the method actors, Toby.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right.
Real fear.
You
Capture
don't
the
get the
fear.
real fear in your eyes if you're not actually potentially about to be murdered.
I don't want to scare you, J Money, but this gun is actually loaded.
Now, panel, this
Action!
video certainly would have been action-packed, at least this scene anyway. What is another scene these very bright-sounding producers were planning to shoot for their music video? Laura Bricker, what do you think?
There's got to be some sort of, something stunts with the car, with somebody on top of the car while they're like driving down the highway. I mean, originally I was thinking there's got to be a woman involved, but listening to these people, I don't think any woman would affiliate with this. So it's like that video. Do you see that video last week of the horse riding in the back of the truck in Texas?
I did.
I mean, it's like there's going to be something like that with these guys, like on the roof of the car, driving down the street with the duct tape guy with like the gun at his head, and maybe up on two wheels, maybe some fire. That's always good.
Gets people's attention.
Velcro somebody to the horse?
Yeah, I don't know.
Toby Ball, what do you think? What would be the next logical scene that these filmmaking geniuses were planning to shoot for this music video?
The next logical scene would clearly be limo with hot tub. Probably with real Patron in their cups.
What about you, Kevin? What do you think the next scene these guys were planning to film was?
Purple Nurple with an actual bandsaw.
Oh, God.
There you go.
Ew. All right. Well, we should probably end it on that note. But before we do, Laura Bricker, do we have a cat of the week this week?
Yeah, hold on just a second here. I got to pull it up. This week, I have turned to members of the Brichter Scale True Crime Rage Walking and Fitness Fun group on Facebook to get some nominations. And there was so many nominations that I don't even know how I can choose one of these animals, because we have the potbelly pig in Angelica's backyard in New Jersey.
Wow.
We have Katie's dog Shaggy, who rage walked with her all week. He was attacked by another dog and lost his right eye 2 years ago.
Ooh.
He still occasionally bumps into stuff, but he manages pretty well. We have Melissa's cockatoo Henry. She works for the MSPCA in Mass as an animal trainer, and she adopted him. The poor thing was like traumatized, plucking all his feathers out. So there are many great cats over there. We have Pickles the cat, Lauren's cat, who loves eating ham and potato chips.
Wow.
I don't know. I mean, I think there's something about rage walkers and animals. They've all got really interesting animals. We've got Christina's dog Kaiser, who actually winks.
Wow.
Oh.
And this has been
sounds
there's
like
a lot of talent.
It's menagerie of the week.
It's an arc of the week on Laura's segment. Well, if you want to reach out to Laura Bricker, Laura, if folks want to reach out to you and help you narrow down that list to choose, I don't know, just one cat or dog or animal of the week, how can they find you on Twitter?
At Laura Bricker.
And Toby Ball, if folks want to reach out to you and give you tips for how to be more of a morning person, how can they find you on Twitter?
Yeah, give me a break this week and send your best recovery wishes to @KevinPFlynn.
Oh, I agree with that. Kevin, if people want to reach out to you and send you those best recovery wishes, you want to reiterate your Twitter handle for us?
Yeah, I'm at Kevin P. Flynn, and thanks.
And if you want to follow this show on Twitter or Instagram, we're at Crime Writers On. You can also follow me on Twitter and Insta at Reb Lavoie. Join our Patreon at patreon.com/Partners in Crime Media to get the Crime Writers On after show right now and all other kinds of bonus content, including Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcast. Our theme song was performed by the New York Ska Jazz Ensemble and used with permission. This podcast was recorded in the Yoga Loft above the Bodega in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi studio, otherwise known as Studio C, the closet in our New Hampshire basement where I keep all of your college class schedules so I can catch you in a gotcha moment about 20 years from now. On behalf of all the crime writers, thanks so much for listening. We will catch you later. Kevin said when I was recording my pre-roll, he said I didn't sound sad enough. He was like, we need your voice. We need your voice to break more.
Come on now.
Oh my God.
You can do that. You can do that in post-production.
Exactly.
That's right. I'm gonna like make you do it again. Come on now.
Partners in Crime Media.
To get the Crime Writers on After Show right now, go to patreon.com/Partners in Crime Media.
Luxury is meant to be livable. Discover the new leather collection at Ashley with premium quality leather sofas, recliners, and more, all built to last. No matter how many spills, scuffs, or pet-related mishaps come its way, the leather collection at Ashley is made with the durability you need for the whole family. Shop the new leather collection at Ashley and find chairs starting at $499.99 and sofas at $599.99. Ashley, for the love of home.